Hey, everybody.
Hi, how are
Hi.
you doing?
Hi.
Hello.
Mm. Our first interview question for you is,
Oh, I'm sorry, wait, before we get started, I just wanted to let you know we have like about 8 minutes per question, but which is a decent amount of time, way longer than last time.
okay, our first question for you is, tell us some of your highlights as a Jewish queer identified person that took place for you from the time of the Stonewall riots and your awareness around HIV and AIDS.
Could you repeat the question a little slower, please?
Yeah, sorry, it's a big question. Tell us some of your highlights as a Jewish queer identified person that took place for you from the time of the Stonewall riot and your awareness surrounding HIV and AIDS.
What year was the Stonewall riot?
In 1968.
Okay. Well, okay. That's pretty much everything. So I joined Chirayu Lohia in 1979. So everything that I'm going to be telling you is post Stonewall. Um, um, Highlights. Okay, so in 1981, I was chair of the Fifth International, co-chair of the Fifth International Conference of Gay and Lesbian Jews, which took place in San Francisco. And at that conference, I met people from around the world who were both Jewish and gay identified. And it was quite an adrenaline rush to be hosting that event here as someone who was fairly new to this world of organized LGBTQ Jewish life, and to meet people from so many different places was exhilarating, and they were all thrilled to be in San Francisco, which at the time was considered gay Mecca, um, which of course, um, ironically, just 2 years later would become the center of the AIDS epidemic in 1983. And when that all happened, the men in our congregation, who were a majority, to be honest, were terrified of what was happening, who was getting infected, how they were getting infected, and the at that time apparent ignorance of the medical establishment about what this was. People were calling it a gay cancer. People had no idea how it was. I don't mean people, I mean medical professionals didn't know how it was transmitted. They didn't understand the various manifestations of it. Some people came down with pneumococcal infections. Some people came down with Kaposi's sarcoma. People had very different manifestations of it, but it was all terrifying. And many of our members became ill. And I remember a friend of mine in the congregation saying to me, Irene, we're going to be going to funerals one after another for a very long time. And I don't know if you call that a highlight, but it was a pivotal moment in our community, in the community of our congregation, as well as the community of the Castro. And what happened was kind of extraordinary. The women of the congregation came together and started to volunteer for donating blood because the men could not donate blood for obvious reasons. We came together around cooking for people who were sick and driving people to appointments. And it was a time when the men came to appreciate the women in a whole new way, because we were not threatened by this disease at that point in time. It was strictly afflicting the men, and many of these men lived alone and were very grateful to have a meal delivered to them. And I have to tell you, one of my most, a moment that I feel some shame about was that I took a casserole to one of our members and I never went to get my container. I was too afraid to go back to the house and to get my container. We knew so little about how this was transmitted. And I that kind of haunts me. As we got to understand more about the illness and as it progressed, many of the men the synagogue created a committee called the Kaiser Brunch Committee, and members would visit patients at Kaiser, and the musicians in our congregation would play music, and we would take food, and we would visit with people in the hospital. I can't talk about this as highlights because this was such a terrible time, and we faced so many new realities. And the first was that, I don't know if you know, but in the Jewish tradition, when a person dies, they are buried very, very quickly, unless they die during Shabbat or immediately preceding Shabbat. But if somebody dies on Tuesday, they're buried on Wednesday, and so on. But part of the ritual of preparing the body for burial is a ritual called tahara. And tahara is the ritual washing of the body, where attendees at the funeral home physically wash the body, place it in a shroud, and that's the shroud in which a Jewish body is buried within a coffin. And the funeral home refused to wash the bodies of our members. And so we had members who volunteered and went to the funeral home and performed tahara on the bodies of our members who had died. The other reality that we faced was that so many of our members were transplants from other parts of the country. We had members who'd moved here from New York and Chicago and Florida and all over the country because they were seeking ways to live, as I pointed out during our last session, an authentic life. And many of them felt they couldn't live an authentic life in the place of their birth. The families would be too embarrassed, judgmental, critical, hostile, fill in any word that you choose. And so our members who were dying, we didn't have anywhere to bury them. We at that point in time, we didn't have our own cemetery, and the families had to arrange for shipping of the bodies to New York, Chicago, Florida, wherever it was, to be buried, which is probably not what those men would have wanted. And so it was shortly after that that myself and two other members who have since died were approached by a very sympathetic member of a large congregation in San Francisco, Sheriff Israel, and offered us our own plot within the Hills of Eternity burial site in Colma, which is south of the city. And sometime, and I'm forgetting the year exactly, but sometime in the mid-80s, we were able to consecrate that ground as the burial ground for Congregation Shar Zahav's members. And that's when we were able to bury our members there, whether they died of AIDS or whatever they died of. We no longer had to face this question of where are we going to send this body. So this was a time of deep sadness and yet deep coming together between the genders, and coming together in ways that we didn't know we would have to. And it took us to a new level of maturity in terms of our experience and in terms of our need for institutional practicalities like a cemetery. So those were some things that stand out for me between 1979 and the middle of the 80s. As the disease became better understood and medications became available and people started living with AIDS, and we have many members who've been HIV positive for 30, 40 years. So it's quite remarkable that these people are still with us. And then I'm not quite sure how this happened. It was some sort of metamorphosis, really, but everybody became more aware of the need for building family. And lesbians were looking for sperm donors from men. And the men who were HIV positive couldn't be, but there were plenty of men who were not. And so suddenly we had babies in our congregation and little toddlers and infants, and then we needed a school. You see how things happen. And so then we needed teachers, and so we created a school, and then we had children learning Hebrew and learning and preparing themselves for bar and bat mitzvah. And we had a new generation coming up who brought new life and ideas and energy to the congregation. On a personal note, I want to go back a little bit, because in 1983, right before the epidemic, we purchased our first building, which was on Danvers Street, Danvers and Caselli. It was a small, formerly Seventh-day Adventist church that we bought, and we entitled the campaign "A Home of Our Own," and I was very involved in fundraising for that. And when we were ready to open, we had a very public and moving ceremony where we carried the Torah down the street and into our home. And there was music and dancing in the street, and it was huge. It was huge. One of our more affluent members, had donated his Rolls Royce to raffle off to raise funds for this building. And we sold tickets at $75 each for this Rolls Royce. And we raised a lot of money and were able to buy that building. And that building was our home up until 1997, 8, when we purchased where we are currently are at 16th and Dolores. So Am I answering your question? I feel like I've gone
Oh,
off on so many different
I was-
tangents, but so much
I-
happened in those years that and these are the things that jumped out into my head right now. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on some things for a second question, but the question is, how did the AIDS plague impact you?
I had a business. I had a business with a business partner. At the time, we had a small publishing business, and my business partner was a gay man. And we were we were very different people, but we brought different skills to our business. I was the sort of business head, and he was the creative mind behind it. And in 1986, I think, he was diagnosed with AIDS. And I didn't know if I would be able to run this business myself. I didn't know how long he was going to live. It was a terrifying experience. As it happens, he lived for several years and died in 94, I think. And so he was the closest person that I lost in the epidemic. There were other members of the congregation that I was very close to. One of our past presidents, Don Albert, who had preceded me as president, died of AIDS. It affected me because I was living in the midst of a community that was terrified and grieving and angry, and that's how it affected me. And it was scary. It was scary in some of the same ways that COVID in the beginning. I mean, COVID in the beginning, we were buying, bleach to wash our groceries. I mean, when you think about that now, it's like insane, but that's what we were doing. We didn't know how this thing was being transmitted. And you're now people who have and are living through an epidemic, and medical science has improved so quickly. I mean, the vaccines for COVID are just a medical miracle that we had a vaccine in a year. For AIDS, it took them 10 years to come up with anything even remotely approaching something that might preserve somebody's life. So, and the Castro changed. I lived in the Castro at the time, and suddenly you saw these frail men walking around with canes who had been, tough guys who went to the gym every day, and suddenly they've got Kaposi's sarcoma on their faces, and they're thin and wasted, and they can barely walk. And the whole nature of the Castro changed. It became a prelude to a graveyard. All the big parties and the music and the dancing and the bars, it all kind of came crashing down around everybody's feet. So, and I lived there, and so it was palpable. If you can imagine that. I don't know if any of you have ever lived anywhere where there's been that kind of shift. It penetrates every pore. And if somebody
Thank you.
coughed, like in the beginning of COVID, you just wanted to, walk 100 yards away from them.
Thank you for sharing your experiences with the epidemic. The next question we wanted to ask was if you could tell us about an important memory, experience, or life lesson that had taken place between 1981 and the early years of the 21st century for you.
That's a brilliant question. 1981, 20 years. So many things happened in that time. I need a moment to think. Can you ask me the question again while I'm thinking?
Yeah, of course. The question was just asking for any important memories, experiences, any life lessons that had taken place between 1981 and the early years of the 21st century.
Okay, so in 1981, I was doing my math here. It was 45 years ago. So I was what was I? Let me see. I was in my 30s, 35, 36. Yeah, what I came to, the life lesson that I think I recognized at that in somewhere around the middle 80s was I started to realize that in my 20s, which I think you're all in right now, am I right? Are you all in your 20s? I knew that I didn't know very much of anything. In my 30s, I thought I knew quite a bit about a bunch of stuff. In my 40s, I was aware that whatever I thought I knew in my 30s, I was completely wrong about. And now I'm going into my 50s, which brings us into the 21st century. And that's when I started to develop a bit more humility. And I think that that is a natural progression, to be honest. And now I'm in my 80s. I just turned 80. And I think I know quite a bit about myself and other people, but I don't understand the world at all. I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand how there is so much violence and misunderstanding and lack of acceptance of the other. I think I'm moving forward because I'm a little later than you've asked me about. I'm in the 21st century, and I have to say that the primary feeling I have right now is a mixture of optimism and despair. And the optimism comes from trying to be in contact as much as I can with young people like yourselves and seeing the ways in which some young people are approaching societal problems, climate problems, economic inequality, and so on. And I take hope in some of the things that I witness and hear and know, even within my own family. People in their 20s and 30s, I wish I could just hang out with all of you guys and forget about my cohorts who are either losing their minds or losing their knees, and whichever comes first. And I'm in despair a lot of the time because the things are very frightening, and we have technology now that could end it all in 5 minutes. And that's a first in the history of human civilization, to know that somebody could push a button and gone. So it's a mixture of despair and optimism. And I have a grandson who's 18, just turned 18, and I ask his opinion about a lot of things. And he gives me hope. He's very pragmatic and very centered and seems to be measured and not too reactive, although it's hard not to be reactive when you're 18. But he gives me hope, and I have a godson who's 30, and he plays in a black metal goth band, and looks like he should be recruited by the Taliban, but he's got a head on his shoulders, and he's a very caring, loving human being, and I'm not even sure I'm answering your question, but am I answering your question?
Yeah, sort of. I just is if you could go over any like specific memories or experiences that kind of led you to this realization that you have now.
Yeah, I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at capturing exact moments. There certainly have been them, but oh, this is not my strong suit. I'll be honest. I'm sure the minute this session is over, I'll kick myself and say, and remember all the things that happened in those years and what they meant.
That's
But
okay. We can skip over it, and then if anything
Yeah.
comes back, we could
Yeah.
share that.
Yeah, I think we'll be
Thank
together
you.
again. I'll make some
Yes,
notes.
definitely.
Yeah, okay. 1981 to now. Events. Okay, got it. That's my homework assignment.
Well, that leads me to our next question, where it asks you to tell us ways that Congregation Shahrazad responded to the AIDS crisis.
I did tell you about the things we did, and I think what I didn't say is how important it was for the families of many of these members to know that there was a congregation that they were part of, that there was a community that was caring about them, that there was a rabbi who would say prayers for them, that there was an institution which would be in touch with them. You know, many people who came to San Francisco didn't necessarily attach themselves to any institution, and to be in a crisis like the AIDS crisis and have family not know who can I contact to find out what's going on? Who can I find out? Who can I ask? You know, where's my son? What's happened? Who's caring for him? How's he paying his rent? What's happened to his job? All of those things. I mean, people's lives changed overnight. And we learned medical terms. Who'd heard of T cells before 1983? Who'd heard of any of these terms that we became familiar with? So I think that the very fact of our existence provided an anchor for families who were far away and worried, sick about what was happening with their kids.
Yeah, that really answers the question. And I know you touched upon it earlier, and that was really beautiful. I liked how you talked about how kind of both genders were coming together in unison and, caring for each other. It's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for the next question that we have for you is what did you do around volunteerism? I know you already touched about that, like a little bit of that in the earlier questions, but if you could like just say more things about it.
Do you mean volunteerism within Shahzahav or in the larger community?
In any aspects of volunteerism.
Okay. Well, Shahzahav took a lot of my volunteer energy. Did any of you ever see the film or the show, The Little Shop of Horrors? So there's this plant that it's like, feed me, feed me, feed me. There's never enough. And I used to call the synagogue the Little Shul of Horrors. It's like it was never enough. It was never enough money. It was never enough energy. There were never enough members. There was never enough space. There was never enough storage. It was never. So within Shahzahav, I served as fundraiser for the first building that we bought. I served as treasurer. I served as president. I served I think the two most important capacities in which I served. One was security. After the bombing at the Pittsburgh synagogue in the East Bay some years ago, I'm forgetting how many years ago, but anyway, every Jewish organization and synagogue was panicked about the security of their buildings, and everyone was hiring security staff, we had been told the city of San Francisco does regular inspections of public buildings. And when they had inspected our building many, many years ago, they pointed out to us that our front doors were not secure, that our windows were not secure, that we didn't have cameras outside, that we didn't have adequate lighting. There were many things they pointed out to us that we never had the money to do. When the Pittsburgh shooting happened, the state of California created grants for Jewish institutions to install higher degrees of security in their buildings. And we got a grant of $75,000. And with that $75,000, we installed new doors, which, by the way, cost $27,000. We installed extra cameras. There's one at the corner of the building, there's one outside the front door, and there's one on the 16th Street side. And we have monitors inside the building that will monitor those cameras 24/7. We installed extra lighting. We had a certain special fabrication added to our windows that if somebody threw a brick through the window, it would not go through. And so I was very proud of that work. And the need grows. Our security is always threatened. We always said we were doubly threatened. If someone wanted to get to Jews, there we are. If someone wanted to get to gay people, there we are. If someone wanted to get to trans people, there we are. We're all in the same place. So my volunteering to improve our security, we also initiated cards for access cards. You can't get in the building. We used to just ring the bell and someone would let anybody in. I mean, it was crazy when you think about it now. You have to have a card with your picture on, and you register it on the pad, and it comes up that you can come in between certain hours. So it's all automated. So we've heightened our security, and that's one project that I'm particularly proud of. And the other project that I did immediately prior to that was called the Legacy Project. And the Legacy Project was created by Jewish Community Federation, JCF. Historically, JCF had never wanted to get involved with synagogues and their financial troubles, because every synagogue has financial troubles. And Federation was much broader. It wanted to address, the Ethiopian immigrants and Russian immigrants and Jewish education and all kinds of things in the larger community. It didn't want to get involved with the synagogues. But they started to recognize that the synagogues had done a rather poor job of planning for their future. And so they came up with a campaign called Legacy, and they sent a trainer to every congregation. And I, of course, was picked to lead this campaign. And this person helped me create a mission statement of why legacy was important. And I created a legacy statement, and we created forms for people to fill out to make bequests upon their death. We had a congregation that was largely single men who had no dependents, and many of them had had successful careers and owned property and had no children, and who are they going to leave their assets to? And many of them filled out forms saying they wanted to leave their assets to Shar Zahav because it had changed their lives. It had given them community. It had given them a place of caring, a place to worship, a place to feel like they belonged. And so the Legacy campaign obtained signatures from about, at that time, a third of the congregation making pledges that they would leave a bequest to Shar Zahav. And people are starting to die. And we've received some very, very surprising and generous bequests. We was kind of stunned, actually. And we have an endowment fund now that has millions of dollars in it from these bequests. And so I feel like my volunteer work has, with the Legacy campaign, has pretty much guaranteed the future of Shar Zahav. We will never have financial problems ever again. That's pretty big.
That's amazing. Thank you for answering that. It was
Outside of
great.
the community, I volunteered at the San Francisco Food Bank, something that I care a great deal about. I volunteered at the SPCA. I'm a good citizen.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing your volunteer work. It's very inspiring.
One person can do a lot in this world. That's the other thing that gives me hope. I'm just one person, and I was able to make some big changes.
Hi, Irene. Thank you for your valuable insight on the last question. I was wondering, what did you do for self-care?
I think every leader in every organization asks themselves this question every day. What am I doing for my self-care? Because these institutions can eat you alive. You care so much about it. You're passionate about it. You know what it's given you, and you want to give it everything you've got. And then you realize you can't. And the hardest thing about self-care in organizations is the conflicts that you inevitably encounter with people who don't share your goals, who don't share your values, who have different ways of approaching problems. I can tell you that when I told the board of the congregation that we were going to have access cards with pictures on, everybody went berserk. They thought we were becoming a communist state, for God's sake. I don't want my picture on a card. Why do I need a card to get into my building? these are the things that you need self-care around, because these things happen in every single organization where you have political divisiveness and where you have different values that people have. What about the cameras? What about my privacy? Everyone can see that I've come into this building. What about my privacy? I don't want cameras at the building. Well, then don't come to the building, because we're gonna have cameras. You know, you run into a lot of stuff that you as a leader, you know that you've got to get these things done, but not everyone wants to get on your bus. They're on some other bus. And that's the stuff where you have to go off for a weekend and turn off your phone and read a good book. And I don't know, self-care, I exercise. I walk a lot. I had a dog. I amuse myself quite well. And I learned over the years not to try not to take this stuff personally. People hate change. I've walked in this building 25 years. Why do I need a card to get in there now? And a card with my picture on it? Because we live in a dangerous world now. It wasn't so dangerous then, and it is now. I don't know if I've answered your question. It's tough to be a leader. It's tough to be a leader. You got to have a thick skin, and you got to take care of yourself. You got to eat right. You got to exercise, and you got to know who you can trust, who your friends are, who you can say things to, and people who are gonna support you in what you're trying to get done.
Thank you so much. I think you've answered it pretty well. Thank you.
Good.
This question kind of bounces off that one, but are there any rituals or Jewish customs that help you with self-care, or just like help you with being a leader in that sense?
Friday night. Friday night. I grew up in a house where we lit candles. We did Shabbat. We didn't watch television. We didn't do anything. I think I mentioned this in our earlier talk. And when our grandson was born, and his mother, a single mother, working mother, needed a break. And my wife and I agreed that we would take him every Friday night, and we would keep him overnight and spend Saturday with him. And as he grew into a toddler, we would light candles. He knows all the prayers. He knew the prayers when he was 4 years old. I'd buy a challah every Friday. He loved challah. He still loves challah. I think Friday night is sacred to me. And it's interesting, if ever my phone rings on Friday night, I say to whoever I'm with, that's no one I need to talk to. Everyone I would want to talk to knows they don't call me on Friday night. The high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, have always been important to me, and they became even more important with my membership in Shar Zahav, because we do it the way we do it, and it's special and unique and precious, and I try not to miss it ever unless I'm traveling. Have no choice. But the high holidays are very, very important. Seder is very important. Seder is the story of liberation. Who wants to hear the story of liberation more than a gay person who's been liberated? You know, I've crossed the Red Sea. I made it through, came out the other side. Seder is beautiful.
Thank you so much. We also, somebody mentioned in class that it was important to ask you about a cookbook or something.
Oh, God, of course, the cookbook. Oh, how could I forget that? Okay, so this was in that period, that magical period, during the AIDS crisis. One of our members, Susan Unger, brilliant, talented woman, said, we need to create a cookbook. All our members are great cooks, and then we can raise money and support the food bank, the AIDS food bank. And so we got together all people who had different skills, writing skills, editing skills, graphic arts skills, publishing skills, me. And we solicited recipes and we tested the recipes, and oh, we actually had a very interesting battle during the course of the cookbook. Okay, so some of our women members were more feminist in their language than some of the rest of us, shall we say. And one of the recipes that was submitted was for pasta puttanesca. Does anybody know what pasta puttanesca is? It's an Italian recipe that is simple, and it involves a paste of anchovies and capers, and a putta in Italian is a whore, and it was the pasta of the whores, okay? And one particular member said, we can't have that recipe in our cookbook. And so you can only imagine the kind of conversations that came up around that. Pasta puttanesca is in our cookbook, if you happen to see it. It survived the battle. So that was one of our battles. The other battle was the naming of the book. We had about 40 people show up for a naming meeting. Do you know the name of the book? Out of Our Kitchen Closets. Brilliant, brilliant name. But of course, not everybody, lots of people had their own ideas about what this book should be called. And it was a pretty interesting session that went on for hours. But Out of Our Kitchen Closets is what survived. And that book came out in, I think, 1985. And we immediately sold, I don't know, 100 of them or something like that. And we donated thousands of dollars to the AIDS Food Bank. And as the sales went on over the years, we continued to donate money to the AIDS Food Bank. And that there was a big cleanup in our building about a year ago. There was a big archive project. We had 45 years of archives, and some very wonderful members of going through the archives, and they found like 200 copies of the book, which everyone had been wanting because it's out of print now. And we're now selling the book again. And so if you want to hold on a moment, I'll show it to you. When we wait till I go get one, I think you'd like to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's rather beaten up because it's rather beaten up. Out of Our Kitchen Closets, with a beautiful arrangement of fruits and vegetables under the rainbow, and the rainbow on the back with the Jewish star, and a little explanation of how the book came into being. And Out of Our Kitchen Closets is a collection of tried and true recipes submitted by members and families and friends of Congregation Shar Zahav. And blah, blah, blah. I could go on. What is gay Jewish cooking? it goes on. It goes on and on. There are wonderful art pieces here, vegetarian cooking, some lovely drawings. Every recipe is credited to the person who submitted it. Every recipe was tested. And my friend Richard Inlander, who died some years ago, this is before computers were able to do indexing. He and I must have spent countless hours hand indexing everything, cross-indexing everything. In other words, borscht, which is a beet soup, a Jewish beet soup, is under the category soup, borscht, and beets. Stuff like that, right? Carrot simmus is in carrots, vegetables, simmus. We did it all by hand. Hours, cross-indexing. Yellow pads, pens, nuts. We raised a lot of money. People still cook from it. People are looking for copies of it. It was a miracle that they just found some. And it was my publishing company that printed it, got it done. And yeah. So thank you for asking about the cookbook. It was huge project. Somebody recently said, why don't we redo the cookbook? And I said, you have no idea what it takes to put a cookbook together. Do any of you know anyone who's put a cookbook together? It is such a lot of work. It's such a lot of work. Anyway, I don't think I'll be part of it if it happens. It would be great if it happened, but anyway, here we are. Thank you.
How many recipes did you have in this cookbook?
There are, it says it right here. We were looking for easy to prepare recipes that taste great, and we got 150 of them.
150.
Yeah. We have Japanese pumpkin soup that's kosher for Passover, 17 types of kugel, and kiwi next to the blintzes. So there's a little, oh God, look at this. There's a little story that Susan Unger wrote, who was the project coordinator. She doesn't live in the city anymore. People talked about, this is the picture of our first building on Danvers Street. It's still there. It's a private home now that was featured on This Old Home. They converted it into a fancy residence. But that was our first building. It was charming. It was really charming. And here's suggested menus for special occasions. Shabbat Eve dinner for 1, Shabbat Eve dinner for 2, 3, 4, and so on. There's a great deal of affection for this. I'm so glad you asked. How could I forget? That was a big part of the 80s. Let me just say that. We were doing a lot in the 80s. We were doing a lot. We had energy. I had energy anyway.
Is there a specific reason why the project is tied to the AIDS food bank, or like did you guys look at other?
Well, it was part of our saying, what can we do? What can we do to raise money? Well, let's do a cookbook and give a percentage of the sale to the AIDS food bank. You know, Jews, everybody knows Jews like food. Everyone knows gay men cook. Let's do a cookbook and give the money to the AIDS food bank. Pretty basic stuff. Yeah.
Did you guys test all the recipes together?
Did we do what together? Test?
Did you
Well,
guys
no,
test them?
everybody, there were different testers, and you know, it took months to do this, you know. Where's the cinnamon? You said cinnamon. Where does the cinnamon go? Where's Where's the almond essence? You put it in the list, but you don't tell us what to do with it. You know, stuff like that. You must have all come, if anyone here is a cook and has followed a recipe from a cookbook, you know there are always missing instructions. Always. I'm holding the bottle, the other day, I'm holding a bottle of almond essence. Where does the almond essence go? It doesn't say. They forgot. Okay, I'll just throw it in. And these are big publishers, not, little homemade publishers.
Do you have a favorite recipe in the book?
Oh. Yeah, I make the simmus from the book. Do you know what simmus is? So part of the Seder story is how the Jews had to make mortar to build the temple back up again. And so simmus is a dish that is a side dish that goes with your main meal, and it consists of chopped nuts, typically walnuts, chopped apples, chopped dried fruits, and red wine and cinnamon. And when you mix all that up, it's like a cement, and it represents the mortar that could be placed between the bricks to rebuild the temple. And so I use the simmus recipe from the cookbook, although there are several recipes, because being Jews, there's a Sephardic recipe for simmus and there's an Ashkenazi recipe for simmus. You have you confronted this difference so far in your education? The Sephardim and the Ashkenazim, big difference. Sephardim have a very Moroccan and North African influence in their cooking, and Ashkenazim are the Eastern European, Pale of Russia, Poland, very different kinds of cuisine. This poor book has seen better days. Oh, God. We reprinted several of the recipes in our newsletter, and every time we did that, I had to Xerox it. I had to copy it, so the book has been taken apart many times.
Have you guys considered reprinting the whole book? I don't know. I'm not familiar with like the process of that, but
Reprinting which book?
just the whole cookbook.
The whole cookbook? No, we haven't considered that because, people eat differently now. Every recipe that calls for 2 cups of sour cream, no one eats 2 cups of sour cream. You know what I'm saying? People eat differently. There are more vegetarian recipes now in cookbooks. There is less meat. It would be a disservice to publish something that was created in the 1983. I mean, that is almost 50 years ago. Nobody eats like that anymore. So I think if we did it again, it would have to be a little more California nouveau cuisine, more vegetarian.
It's gonna be up to the new generation.
Yeah, exactly. More grains,
Created.
more healthy things, less sour cream. Yeah.
How much did you guys sell it for?
I think it was $12.95. Yeah, $12.95. And I think we gave $3 or $4 from each book. And we sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. I forget what the printing was, 1,000. I forget. People have written to us from South Africa. Do you have any copies of the book? People have written to us from Australia. I saw this book. Where can I get this book?
It's on sale on Amazon right now for $41.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. How did they get copies?
I have no clue. It says buy used for $41.
Oh, by used. 41. What's a collector's item? Even this little beat up one, how about that? It's a collector's item. Thanks for telling me that. That's great. Oh boy, so much. So much happened. Oh, 56 seconds. Any questions for 53 seconds?
I have a really fast question. How many, did you say specifically like how long the process of making the book took? Like, was it over a year, less than a year?
It was over a year. I do know that. I do know that. Yeah, it was a long project. Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, it seemed endless actually at the time.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you for coming again today and sharing your stories and experiences. We look forward to meeting again next week.
Exactly, me
Yes, thank
too.
you so much. We
Thank
appreciate
you
your
so
time.
much. I love meeting you all and keep up
Lots
the
to
good
about the book. Thank you.
Bye bye.